Amelia Kavanagh had always prided herself on being self-sufficient. She was the kind of woman who worked hard, kept her personal life private, and never sought attention. She had built a modest but comfortable life for herself, a life she had fought for since her father had passed away when she was only 20. The Kavanagh family farm had been a haven for her as a child, a place where she felt safe and grounded, a place that had always felt like home. But as an adult, it had become a responsibility, a weight she carried every day. It wasn't just the land that needed her, it was the legacy of her family, the dreams her father had for the farm that she was determined to preserve. Amelia had spent the last few years fighting to keep the farm afloat. The world had changed, and so had the ways people farmed, but one thing had remained constant, the pressure to keep going. The pressure to succeed. When her father had passed, he had left her with more than just a farm. He had left her with an inheritance of dreams and expectations, ones that sometimes felt suffocating. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to let go. She couldn't abandon the place where she had grown up, the place where every corner held a memory, every inch of land was soaked in her family's history. Her mornings were spent at the local courthouse, dealing with legal matters, while her afternoons were devoted to managing the farm, checking the crops, handling deliveries, making sure everything was running smoothly. It was exhausting, but it was the life she had chosen. There was no room for distractions. No room for anything other than making sure that the farm survived. And then came Sebastian Drake. Amelia had first encountered Sebastian when she received a letter from Drake Enterprises, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. The letter was straightforward, detailing how the company was interested in purchasing large portions of farmland in the area, including her family's farm. It was a tempting offer, especially for someone like Sebastian, who had built an empire from the ground up and was known for his ruthless business tactics. He saw potential in the land, potential to turn it into something else entirely. But for Amelia, it was more than just land. It was her father's legacy. It was everything she had ever known. Sebastian had contacted her directly after the letter was sent, asking to meet in person. He was coming to town for a business trip, and he wanted to discuss the deal. Amelia had agreed reluctantly, aware that she would need to meet with him sooner or later, but fully prepared to turn down his offer. After all, she had nothing to gain from selling the farm to a billionaire who saw it as nothing more than a profitable investment. She had worked too hard to let someone like him take it from her without a fight. When they met for the first time, it was in a small cafe in the center of town. She had arrived early, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee, waiting for him to arrive. She had heard the rumors about Sebastian, his sharp mind, his success, and, most notably, his reputation for being a shark in the business world. He was a man who got what he wanted, and he never let anyone stand in his way. Amelia had heard all about his latest ventures, his deals, and how he was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. But she wasn't impressed. Not yet, anyway. When he walked in, Amelia was taken aback. It wasn't just the way he looked, though she had to admit, he was handsome in that effortless, dangerous way, but it was the way he carried himself. He walked into the cafe like he owned it, his eyes scanning the room as if everything in his path was meant to be there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture impeccable. He was exactly the kind of man who had everything, but whose presence made others feel like they had nothing. "Ms. Kavanagh," he said, his voice smooth and calm, almost too calm for someone who had just entered a small-town cafe. "I'm Sebastian Drake. It's a pleasure to meet you." Amelia stood up, offering him a tight smile. "I don't think I'm as pleased to meet you as you are to meet me," she replied, her voice guarded. She couldn't help herself. She wasn't here to be charmed by him. Sebastian chuckled, an easy, confident sound that made the air between them thicken. "I like your honesty," he said, sitting across from her. "Most people would have pretended to be excited. But I appreciate someone who's upfront." Amelia didn't answer right away. She had no intention of giving him the satisfaction of an easy conversation. She wasn't here to talk about his money or his business. She was here to protect her family's farm. "Let's get to the point," she said after a moment, her voice cool. "You're here to discuss the offer you made for my farm. I'm sure you know that I'm not interested in selling." Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly, but the smile never left his face. "I don't think you fully understand the situation, Ms. Kavanaugh. This is an opportunity you don't want to pass up. We're offering you a price far above the market value, and you'll be set for life." Amelia shook her head, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I don't need to be set for life," she said firmly. "This farm isn't just a piece of land. It's a part of my family's history. My father worked this land. He built it from the ground up. I'm not going to sell it for a price, no matter how big." Sebastian studied her for a moment, and then he leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, but there was something calculating in the way he watched her. "I admire your dedication, but it's not enough, you know. Dedication doesn't keep a business afloat. You're fighting a losing battle." Amelia felt a rush of anger, but she kept her voice steady. "You don't know anything about me or my family." Sebastian's gaze softened slightly, but his words were still sharp. "Maybe not. But I know how this works. Eventually, everyone has a price." "Not me," Amelia shot back, standing up and pushing her chair back. "I'm not for sale." Sebastian stood as well, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, the tension between them was almost tangible. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, her anger mixing with the frustration of knowing that, for all his power, Sebastian Drake could never understand what this farm meant to her. To her father. Without thinking, Amelia slapped him across the face. It wasn't calculated, wasn't something she had planned, it was a pure reaction. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she couldn't believe what she had just done. But as the sound of the slap echoed in the cafe, she felt an overwhelming sense of rightness. She had stood up for what mattered. She had stood up for herself. For a split second, Sebastian seemed stunned. His cheek reddened from the impact, but he didn't step back. Instead, he did the unexpected. He pulled her toward him, his grip gentle but firm, and kissed her. It wasn't a soft kiss, or a playful one, it was a kiss that held the weight of everything unspoken between them. The kiss was a challenge, an invitation, a question. When they pulled away, both of them breathless, he looked at her, his expression more intense than before. "You've got fire, Amelia. I'll give you that." Amelia's chest tightened, and for a moment, she had no words. All she knew was that this man, this infuriating, confident, arrogant man, had completely disarmed her. The days following the incident at the cafe felt like they had been taken from a different life. Amelia couldn't shake the memory of Sebastian's kiss, of the way it had caught her off guard, the way his lips had felt against hers despite the anger that had been boiling inside her only moments before. It wasn't just the kiss that unsettled her, it was the way it had left her questioning everything. One minute, they had been two enemies locked in a battle over her family's land, and the next, they were two people caught in an overwhelming moment of something that could only be described as intimacy. It wasn't just physical. There was something deeper beneath the surface, something that neither of them had acknowledged but both could feel. For Amelia, that kiss opened something inside her, something she had spent years keeping locked away. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, especially not with someone like Sebastian. But he had seen something in her that no one had before, something raw, something that made him push past her defenses, even when she had slapped him in anger. He had broken through the walls she had so carefully built around her heart. That night, after their encounter, Amelia had returned to her apartment, her thoughts in disarray. She tried to focus on her work, on the things she could control, but every time she sat down to go over the farm's financial reports or prepare for her next meeting with her lawyer, her mind kept drifting back to Sebastian. The way he had looked at her before he kissed her. The intensity in his eyes that had both terrified and intrigued her. She hadn't allowed herself to feel this way about anyone, least of all him. But even as she tried to ignore it, even as she buried herself in her work, Amelia couldn't escape the fact that Sebastian was right, there was something undeniable between them. The attraction wasn't just physical. It was something more complicated, something she wasn't prepared for. He had shaken her, made her see things in a way she never had before. And as much as she hated to admit it, part of her was drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. The following week, she found herself sitting in her office late one evening, trying to finish the paperwork for the farm's upcoming auction. She had been avoiding the inevitable, the reality that the farm might not be able to survive without drastic changes, including selling off some of the land. Her father's legacy was slipping through her fingers, and the thought of it made her stomach churn. The idea of selling to someone like Sebastian was the last thing she wanted, but it seemed like the only option left. Just as she was about to call it a night, there was a knock at the door. She looked up, surprised to see the silhouette of someone standing in the doorway. It wasn't until the door opened that she saw who it was. Sebastian. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly pushed aside the papers she had been working on, trying to mask the tension in the air. She hadn't expected to see him again, at least not so soon. After their last meeting, she thought they had established where they stood, enemies with a mutual goal, but now, seeing him in her office, everything seemed different. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Sebastian said, his voice calm but still laced with that underlying confidence that seemed to follow him everywhere. He was dressed in his usual sharp suit, looking every bit the part of the successful businessman he was, but there was something more to him tonight. His eyes were softer, less guarded. Amelia didn't know how to respond. Her emotions were still a tangled mess from the kiss they had shared, and seeing him now, after everything, only added to the chaos in her head. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice more curt than she intended. "I came to talk," he said simply, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I think it's time we have a real conversation, Amelia." She stood up from her desk, unsure of how to handle this. She had spent days replaying the events of their last meeting, but nothing had prepared her for this, Sebastian in her office, asking to talk. "We've already had a conversation," she said, her voice stiff. "And I told you my answer. I'm not selling." He regarded her quietly for a moment, his gaze studying her face as if trying to read her. "You've made your position clear. But I think you're missing something," he said, stepping closer. "This isn't just about business for me. I want to understand you. I want to know why this land means so much to you." Amelia's chest tightened. She wasn't ready for this conversation. She wasn't ready to open up to him about her father, about the sacrifices she had made, about everything that had led her to this point. "You don't understand, Sebastian," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what it's like to watch everything your family worked for crumble. To be the one left behind, trying to hold on to something that was never meant to be yours in the first place." Sebastian's expression softened, and for the first time, Amelia saw a glimmer of something different in him, a compassion that she hadn't expected. "I may not understand completely," he said quietly, "but I know what it's like to feel like you're fighting a battle you can't win. I've been there. I've lost things I couldn't control." Amelia's eyes narrowed, skepticism creeping into her thoughts. "What do you know about loss, Sebastian? You have everything." His face hardened at her words, but his voice remained steady. "I may have wealth, but that doesn't mean I don't know what it's like to lose. I lost my mother when I was young. I lost my childhood to the business I had to build. I had to make sacrifices to get where I am, and I didn't always get what I wanted. I've been fighting my entire life to fill that empty space inside me. To prove something to myself." There was a long pause, and for the first time since they had met, Amelia saw Sebastian not as the businessman, not as the wealthy billionaire, but as a man who had been shaped by his own pain and struggles. She wasn't sure why, but for the first time, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to open up to her, to share something so personal, so raw. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," she said, her voice softening. I didn't know. He gave her a small, almost sad smile. I never expect anyone to know, Amelia. That's the problem. But I do know one thing now, I don't want to be that man anymore. The one who's so focused on his own success that he forgets the people around him. And that's why I'm here. Amelia didn't know how to respond. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. She had never seen this side of Sebastian before, and it unsettled her. She had always seen him as the enemy, the man who threatened everything she loved, but now he was human, just like her. I don't know what you want from me, Sebastian, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't expect you to, he replied. But I do want you to know that I'm not just here to take from you. I'm here because I want to help. I want to find a way for both of us to win, for both of us to get what we want. Amelia looked at him, still unsure of what he was offering. There was something in his eyes that made her want to believe him, but it was hard. She had spent so long fighting alone. The thought of someone offering help, especially someone like Sebastian, was hard to swallow. I need time, she said finally. I need time to think. Sebastian nodded, his expression softening. Take all the time you need. But just know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. As he turned to leave, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation had changed something between them. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but for the first time, she felt like she was no longer alone in this fight. Whether or not she could trust Sebastian, she didn't know. But one thing was certain, things between them were no longer just about business. There was something else now, something she didn't understand yet, but couldn't deny. And for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Amelia spent the next few days wrestling with the emotions and thoughts that had surfaced after Sebastian's visit. The days blurred together as she tried to balance her responsibilities at the farm with the complex feelings that had begun to surface after their conversation. The more she tried to focus on the farm, the more her mind wandered back to Sebastian. His words about loss, about wanting to help, echoed in her thoughts, and she couldn't seem to shake the image of his eyes, the way they had softened when he talked about the pain he had carried with him for so many years. It wasn't just his wealth or his power that had thrown her off, it was the vulnerability he had shown her, the side of him she never expected. Amelia had always been so sure of herself, so convinced that her way was the only way to navigate through life. She had built walls around herself over the years, refusing to let anyone in, determined to protect the legacy her father had left her. But now, in the face of Sebastian's sincerity, she wasn't so sure. He had made it clear that he wasn't there just to take. He had offered help, not just for his own gain, but because, in his own way, he believed in what she was fighting for. And that made her question everything she had thought she knew about herself. She woke up the following Sunday with a sense of resolve. She couldn't keep running from the decisions she needed to make. She couldn't keep pretending that the situation with the farm would solve itself. Sebastian was right about one thing, there had to be a way forward, a way to find common ground. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her. But before she could entertain any ideas about working with him, she needed to be honest with herself about what she wanted and what she was willing to risk. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter as she was finishing her breakfast. It was a text from Sebastian. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to check in with you. I know you've been busy, but I'd love to sit down and talk again when you're ready. She stared at the message for a few moments, her thumb hovering over the reply button. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to keep her distance, but she knew deep down that wasn't going to help anything. She needed to face this head-on. She couldn't keep pretending that Sebastian was just another business adversary. They were past that now. I'm ready to talk, she typed back, her fingers slightly trembling. Let's meet tomorrow. Same place. She set the phone down and sat back, her heart pounding in her chest. Tomorrow. The thought of seeing him again made her stomach flip, but there was no turning back now. She was done running. The next day, Amelia arrived at the cafe earlier than their scheduled meeting. The place was quiet, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, casting a soft glow on the tables. She needed the time alone to think, to collect her thoughts. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but she knew that she needed clarity. A few minutes before their meeting time, the door chimed, and she looked up to see Sebastian walking in. He was dressed casually today, still impeccable, but more relaxed than usual. There was something different about him. His usual confidence was there, but there was also a vulnerability that had been evident the last time they spoke. The man who stood before her now wasn't just the cold billionaire she had first encountered. He was someone else entirely. "Amelia," he said softly, his eyes searching hers as he approached her table. "It's good to see you again." She stood up, offering him a tight smile. "You, too." He sat down across from her, his posture still confident, but there was a gentleness in his demeanor that made her relax just a little. "I know the last time we met, things were a bit intense," he said, his voice low. "I don't want to make things harder for you. But I do think we need to figure out where we stand, what we both want from this situation." Amelia's heart began to race as she stared at him. She didn't know what to say. Everything felt more complicated than she had ever anticipated. What did she want? What did she really want from this? From him? "I think it's time we have that conversation," she said, her voice steady, though inside she was trembling. "I've been thinking a lot, and I know I can't keep pretending like this is just about business. It's not. There's more at stake here." Sebastian nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know. And that's why I wanted to meet with you. I respect your decision, Amelia. I do. But I also think we can find a solution that benefits both of us. I want to help you keep the farm. Not because I want to take it from you, but because I believe in it. I believe in what your father built." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and she found herself swallowing the lump in her throat. This was the man who had come to her, offering to buy her family's farm, the man she had fought so hard against, now telling her that he wanted to help. It was almost too much to process. "You're not just here to take what's mine, are you?" she asked quietly, the words coming out before she could stop them. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if she had laid her heart out on the table for him to see. Sebastian's eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, he reached out across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "No, Amelia. I'm not. I don't want to take anything from you. I've seen the way you fight for this place, for your family's legacy. It's something that's rare, something worth preserving. I want to be a part of that. I want to help you protect what matters most to you." The words hit her harder than she expected, and for a moment, she felt a surge of emotion that she couldn't hold back. This wasn't what she had imagined. This wasn't the arrogant businessman she had pegged him to be. This was someone who understood her, who saw beyond the business deal to the person she was beneath all the layers of defense she had built over the years. "You don't owe me anything," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know why you're doing this. You could take the land, sell it for a fortune, and walk away. Why are you offering to help me?" Sebastian looked at her, his expression full of emotion, the kind she had never expected to see from him. "Because I see something in you, Amelia. I see the strength, the passion you have for your family and this farm. I see how hard you've worked, how much you've sacrificed. I see a woman who's afraid of losing everything but is still fighting to hold on to what matters. And I don't want you to lose it. I don't want you to give up. Not on this, not on yourself." The words were too much, too overwhelming. Amelia felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, unwilling to show weakness in front of him. "I don't know how to trust you, Sebastian. I've spent my whole life trusting myself, trusting my instincts, and they've never steered me wrong. But you." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I don't know what to make of you anymore." Sebastian's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand. "I don't want you to trust me blindly, Amelia. I want to earn your trust. I want to prove that I'm not the man you think I am. I'm not just some businessman who wants to win at all costs. I'm a man who sees something real in you, in what you've built. And I want to be part of that. However that happens." Amelia sat back in her chair, her mind racing as she tried to process everything. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't the man who had barged into her life with offers of wealth and power. This was someone else, someone who was offering something she hadn't known she needed. Hope. The chance to save what mattered most to her. "I'm not saying yes, Sebastian," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I'll consider it. I'll think about what you've said." Sebastian's face softened, and he smiled slightly. "That's all I ask. Just take the time you need. But know that I'm here. And I won't give up on you or this farm." For the first time since their paths had crossed, Amelia felt a shift inside herself. She wasn't sure what the future held or whether Sebastian was someone she could truly trust, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone in this fight anymore. And that was something she hadn't realized she needed until now. The following days after their meeting were filled with a strange, overwhelming mix of emotions for Amelia. She tried to focus on the farm, her responsibilities, the endless paperwork that seemed to pile up with each passing day. But every time she tried to bury herself in work, her mind drifted back to Sebastian, his words, the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet confidence with which he had promised to help her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to accept his offer, but she couldn't ignore the fact that he had opened a door for her, a door to a future she hadn't even allowed herself to imagine. The phone calls from her lawyer didn't help ease her anxiety. The farm was still in jeopardy, and though she fought to keep it afloat, the reality of the situation was becoming more and more apparent with each passing day. Her father's legacy, the land he had worked tirelessly to build, was at risk of slipping through her fingers. She had always believed that hard work and perseverance would carry her through any storm, but now she was beginning to wonder if that was enough. As much as she tried to resist it, the idea of accepting Sebastian's help lingered in the back of her mind. He had made it clear that he wasn't interested in taking the farm from her. He wanted to preserve it. But there was still that nagging doubt, that fear of being swallowed by his world, the world of business, power, and wealth. She didn't belong there, and part of her was terrified that if she allowed herself to fall deeper into his orbit, she would lose herself completely. It was late one evening when Sebastian called again, his voice calm but purposeful. "Amelia," he said, "I was thinking. There's a meeting tomorrow morning with my financial team. It's nothing formal, just an initial discussion about how we can help with the farm. I understand if you're still unsure, but I'd like you to join us." Amelia hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She wasn't ready to make any permanent choices, but the idea of hearing him out, of understanding his offer more clearly, felt like the only way to get the answers she needed. "I'll be there," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. The next morning, she found herself standing in front of a sleek, modern office building in the city. The stark contrast between the world she had built and the world Sebastian inhabited was undeniable. Her hands clenched at her sides as she stepped inside, feeling the cool, polished floors beneath her feet and the low hum of conversations from the other side of the glass doors. The air smelled of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee, a world so different from the one she had known, one that felt like it could swallow her whole if she wasn't careful. When she entered the conference room, Sebastian was already there, waiting for her. He stood up when she walked in, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that made her stomach flutter. He had on a sharp suit, the same calculated confidence that seemed to radiate from him, but there was something different in the way he looked at her today. Something softer, more sincere. "Good morning, Amelia," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I'm glad you could make it." Amelia nodded, her mind still swirling with doubts. "Thank you for the invitation." As she sat down, the financial team, a group of sharp, suited professionals, introduced themselves. They were polite, efficient, and direct in their manner, asking questions about the farm's financials, its operations, and its long-term goals. The conversation, though technical, was eye-opening. She had never considered the farm in terms of investments and asset management. To her, it had always been home, something to protect, something that was more than just a piece of land. But now, sitting in this room, listening to these experts discuss ways to secure its future, she realized that she had no choice but to approach it with a different perspective. Sebastian was quiet during most of the discussion, his focus entirely on Amelia, observing her as she answered questions and engaged with the team. He was patient, letting her lead, letting her decide how much of herself she was willing to give. She appreciated that. For the first time, it didn't feel like he was forcing her into a decision. It felt like he was allowing her to make her own choices, to take control of the direction she wanted to go. At the end of the meeting, the team made their suggestions, outlining a few options that could help stabilize the farm's future. They spoke of loans, investments, partnerships, and a few potential buyers who would allow her to keep the land while taking on some of the financial burden. It was a lot to process, and Amelia felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. There was no easy answer. No perfect solution. As the team filed out of the room, leaving Amelia and Sebastian alone, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had heard their suggestions, but nothing felt like the perfect answer. She wasn't sure if there even was one. Sebastian waited for a moment before speaking, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "What do you think, Amelia?" She sighed, rubbing her forehead as if trying to clear the weight of the decision. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "I've never thought about it like this before. Everything feels so complicated." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I understand that. I know you didn't come here today to be swept into my world. But I'm not asking you to join it. I'm asking you to take the best path for you and for the farm. This isn't just about business, Amelia. It's about protecting what's important." She met his gaze, her heart racing as she considered his words. "And what if the best path isn't the one that involves you?" Sebastian paused, as if weighing his response. "Then we'll figure that out together. I'm not here to force anything on you. I just want to be part of the solution. Whatever that means." Amelia could feel the sincerity in his voice, and it struck her deeply. She had never imagined that someone like Sebastian, someone with so much power, someone who seemed so different from her, would offer her a solution without strings attached. And yet, there he was, offering not just his resources, but his time, his trust. It wasn't just a business transaction for him. He had made that clear from the beginning. She stood up, her hands still trembling slightly. "I'll need time to think about everything. This is a lot, and I need to process it." Sebastian nodded, standing up with her. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." As she made her way out of the building, Amelia felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The decision was still hers to make, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was making it alone. She wasn't sure what the future held, or whether she could ever fully trust Sebastian, but for the first time in a long time, she had hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. And with that thought, Amelia walked into the uncertainty of her future, ready to face whatever came next. Amelia spent the next few days in a state of restless indecision. The meeting with Sebastian and his team had left her with more questions than answers. She had learned a lot about the financial mechanics behind saving the farm, but she still wasn't sure how she felt about accepting help from someone like him. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that the farm had been built with blood, sweat, and tears. It wasn't just land to be bought or sold, it was the heart of their family, a legacy that couldn't be measured in dollars or cents. As the days passed, she found herself torn between the practicality of what Sebastian was offering and the emotional weight of preserving her family's history. She knew she couldn't do it alone, she had already tried and failed in so many ways. The bills were mounting, the land was being encroached upon by developers, and the future of the farm seemed more uncertain than ever. Sebastian's offer was a lifeline, a chance to save it, to keep the place she loved intact. But the cost of accepting his help was something she wasn't sure she was ready for. She couldn't escape the nagging fear that once she let him in, there would be no going back. The tension in her chest never seemed to ease, and the longer she put off making a decision, the more exhausted she became. She spent sleepless nights replaying the meeting in her mind, trying to reconcile the man who had come across as so arrogant and calculating with the person who had shown her vulnerability, who had opened up about his own losses. He wasn't just a businessman. She had seen that in the way he looked at her when he spoke about the farm. There was something in his gaze, something deeper, that made her wonder if there was more to him than what she had first assumed. On the fifth evening after the meeting, when the sun had long since dipped below the horizon, Amelia found herself standing in the kitchen of her apartment, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She had been avoiding Sebastian's calls, unsure of how to proceed. She didn't want to face him, didn't want to hear the offer again. But she knew she couldn't run from this forever. The farm depended on her, and she had to make a choice. The phone rang again, its insistent buzz cutting through the silence of the room. She stared at it for a long moment, contemplating whether to pick it up. A part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part of her knew that the time had come. With a sigh, she set the cup down and answered the phone. "Amelia?" Sebastian's voice came through the line, calm but unmistakably tense. "I've been trying to reach you. I know you've been busy, but I wanted to check in. Have you had any time to think about everything?" Her throat tightened as she heard the sincerity in his voice. She hated that he could still affect her like this. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quieter than she had intended. "But I'm still not sure. I need more time." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Sebastian spoke again, his tone softer now. "I understand. But I think we need to talk in person. I don't want to pressure you, but I don't want you to feel like you're making this decision alone either. I'll be in town tomorrow, if you're willing to meet." Amelia closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She hadn't expected him to be so persistent, but then again, she hadn't expected him to be so sincere either. He had given her space, allowed her to make her own choice, and now, he was asking for one more conversation. One more chance to make his case. "I'll meet you tomorrow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need answers, Sebastian. I need to know what this really means, what this will cost me, what you really want from me." "I promise you, I'm not here to take anything from you," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm here to help. But I understand your hesitancy, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just give me the chance to explain." The conversation ended shortly after that, and Amelia was left alone with her thoughts once again. The uncertainty she had been carrying for days seemed to loom over her, but she knew that tomorrow would bring some sort of clarity. Either she would take the step forward, trusting Sebastian and his offer, or she would walk away, determined to figure it out on her own. She spent the night unable to sleep, tossing and turning, her mind caught in a web of possibilities. What if she let him help her, but it came at the cost of losing herself in the process? What if his offer wasn't as generous as it seemed? What if it led her down a path she couldn't return from? And yet, another part of her, the part that had been fighting to save the farm for so long, wondered if this was the only way. The only chance she had to secure the farm's future. She couldn't afford to let fear control her decisions, not when the farm was on the line. By morning, she was exhausted, but a sense of resolve had settled over her. She had to meet with him. She had to face whatever decision lay ahead. And, in doing so, she had to be brave. For herself, for the farm, and for the legacy her father had left her. The cafe where they had agreed to meet was a familiar one, a cozy little place tucked away on the corner of a busy street. It was quiet, intimate, a place where she could have a conversation without distractions. As she entered the cafe, she immediately spotted Sebastian sitting at a corner table, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he stared at a file in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening when he saw her. "Amelia," he said, standing up as she arrived. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." She nodded, her throat tightening as she took a seat across from him. "I'm still not sure about all of this," she said, her voice hesitant. "But I'm listening." Sebastian didn't immediately respond. Instead, he sat down and placed the file in front of her, sliding it toward her with a small gesture. "I've put together a few ideas," he said. "Plans that might help you keep the farm in your family's hands without having to make sacrifices you're not comfortable with. I don't want to push you into anything, Amelia. But I think this could work." Amelia hesitated, then opened the file. Inside were detailed proposals, financial strategies, potential investors who were aligned with her vision, and a roadmap that would allow her to keep the farm and still pay off the debts that were suffocating her. The plan was ambitious, but it wasn't impossible. She could see how it might work, how it could be the lifeline the farm needed to survive. But what she couldn't see was how it would change her, how it would change the future of the farm once it was entangled with Sebastian's business. "Why are you doing this, Sebastian?" she asked, looking up from the papers. "Why are you offering all of this? You don't need to." Sebastian met her gaze, his expression steady, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke to the depth of his feelings, feelings that he had never expressed before. "Because I believe in you, Amelia. I believe in what you're fighting for. And maybe I'm not the person you expected to help you, but I'm here. And I want to help you save what matters to you." Amelia looked down at the papers again, her fingers lightly tracing the edges. The decision weighed heavily on her, but she knew she couldn't walk away from it any longer. Sebastian had given her a choice, and now, she had to decide which path to take. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, "but I think I'm ready to trust you. To trust this." Sebastian's face softened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to smile. "Thank you, Amelia. You won't regret this, I promise." As they sat there, discussing the details and the next steps, Amelia felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was no longer alone in the fight for her father's farm. And for the first time, she was ready to embrace the uncertainty of the future, whatever it might bring. The next few weeks seemed to move in a blur for Amelia. Each day brought new challenges, new questions, and, with each step forward, she found herself becoming more and more entangled in Sebastian's world. The proposal he had put in front of her, the plan that seemed to hold the promise of saving her family's farm, wasn't just a lifeline for the land, it was a bridge between two very different worlds. And with every passing day, the more she realized how much she had allowed him into her life, into her thoughts, and perhaps, into her heart. She spent long hours poring over the details of the plan, going through the financial documents with her lawyer, meeting with potential investors, and discussing the future with Sebastian. He had been patient, always encouraging, but never pushing. There was a quiet determination in him that she had come to respect, and while part of her still fought the pull of his influence, another part, her heart, perhaps, began to trust him more than she had ever expected. It wasn't just about the farm anymore, it was about the possibility of something more, something she wasn't ready to admit even to herself. Every time they spoke, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, intellectual, and deeply personal. Sebastian had a way of making her feel like she was truly being seen, not just as a woman, but as a person, with all her flaws, her strengths, her fears, and her dreams. She had never experienced that before, not to this extent. In his presence, she felt both safe and exposed, like she was free to be her truest self, and yet, at the same time, vulnerable to the intensity of his gaze. One evening, after another long meeting with his financial team, Sebastian asked her to meet him for dinner. It wasn't unusual for them to discuss business over a meal, but there was something about the way he phrased the invitation this time that made Amelia pause. "I want to take you somewhere special tonight, something a little less formal than our usual meetings. Let's just talk. No business, no plans, just you and me. Her heart skipped a beat. There was something about the way he said it, something that made her wonder if this was a conversation that went beyond the business they had been navigating for weeks. Despite herself, she agreed. The restaurant he chose was an upscale, modern place with an inviting atmosphere. It was located in a quiet part of the city, far from the busy, hectic world they both inhabited. As soon as Amelia walked in, she was struck by the warmth of the place, soft lighting, elegant decor, and the subtle scent of fresh flowers filling the air. It was a far cry from the usual business dinners or conference rooms they had been in recently. This felt different. More personal. Sebastian was already seated when she arrived, his back to the room, but when he turned and saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her heart flutter. He looked different tonight, his usual sharp, business-focused demeanor replaced by a more relaxed, almost intimate expression. "Amelia," he said, standing to greet her. His voice was softer than usual, and there was something in his eyes that made her feel like this wasn't just another dinner. This wasn't about the farm, or the business they had been tangled in for weeks. This was something else entirely. "You look beautiful," he added, his gaze lingering on her with genuine admiration. His words felt different, warmer, more sincere. "Thank you," she replied, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She felt the weight of his gaze, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. They sat down, and for a while, neither of them said much. The soft clink of silverware on plates, the gentle hum of conversation from other diners, it all faded into the background as they sat across from each other, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Finally, Sebastian broke the silence. "You've been quiet lately, Amelia," he said, his voice gentle. "I know you're still processing everything. I just want to know, how are you really feeling about all of this? About the farm, about the future?" His question was direct, and for a moment, Amelia was caught off guard. She hadn't really stopped to think about how she was feeling. It had been so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of meetings, papers, plans, and negotiations that she had forgotten to consider her own emotions, her own heart. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her wine glass, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, she wasn't sure how she felt. On one hand, she was grateful for everything Sebastian had done. Without him, the farm would likely be lost. But on the other hand, every decision they made together seemed to push her closer to a world she wasn't sure she was ready to enter. A world where he had so much influence, so much power. And no matter how much she admired his determination, no matter how much she appreciated his help, there was a part of her that wondered, what was his real motivation? "I don't know what to think, to be honest," she said, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. "Part of me is grateful for everything you've done. You've given me a chance to save something I thought was already gone. But another part of me," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "Another part of me is afraid. Afraid that I'm losing control over something that's meant so much to me for so long. I've spent my whole life protecting this farm. I don't know what it would mean to have someone else's influence involved in its future." Sebastian's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. He reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his, the warmth of his touch sending a wave of comfort through her. "I get it," he said quietly, his voice low and sincere. "I've never wanted to take control of your life or your family's legacy, Amelia. I just want to help you protect it. I know it's hard to trust me, especially with everything that's at stake, but I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking you to let me help you carry the weight. I'm here because I believe in what you're doing. I believe in you." His words hit her harder than she expected. There was something so genuine in his voice, something that made her want to believe him, to trust him. She had never allowed anyone to help her like this before. She had always been the one in control, the one who handled everything herself. But with Sebastian, there was something different. His presence wasn't overbearing. It wasn't about domination or power. It was about partnership. I'm afraid of losing myself in this, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to become someone I don't recognize, someone who's just along for the ride. Sebastian's grip tightened on her hand, and he looked at her with a soft intensity. You won't lose yourself, Amelia. I'm not asking you to be anyone else but yourself. I want to walk alongside you, not ahead of you. We can build something together, but only if it's something you want. The sincerity in his words resonated deeply within her. Amelia felt something shift in that moment, like the fog in her mind was beginning to clear. It wasn't about letting go of her independence. It was about finding a way to share the burden, to share the responsibility without sacrificing the essence of who she was. She took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to release the tight grip of fear that had been holding her back for so long. I'm not ready to make any final decisions yet, she said, her voice steadier now. But I think I'm ready to trust you. To let you help. Sebastian smiled, a genuine, relieved smile, and in that moment, Amelia saw the man she had begun to believe in. Not just the billionaire, not just the businessman, but a man who cared about something more than his own success. A man who was willing to stand by her, to help her preserve the legacy that meant so much to her. I won't let you down, he promised softly, his voice full of conviction. As the evening continued, they talked about the farm, about the future, and about their shared vision for what could be. But there was something else between them now, something unspoken but palpable. It wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about trust, about partnership, and the possibility of something more. As they walked out of the restaurant together, the crisp night air greeting them, Amelia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't walking it alone. Sebastian was there beside her, and together, they could face whatever came next. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Amelia. As soon as she had made the decision to trust Sebastian, everything started moving faster than she had anticipated. The meetings with his team became more frequent, the plans for the farm's future slowly taking shape. She had expected to feel more uncertain, more guarded, but instead, there was a growing sense of relief that filled her. She was no longer carrying the weight of the farm's survival on her own shoulders. Sebastian's involvement had lifted a burden she hadn't realized had been suffocating her. But, as much as things seemed to be progressing smoothly on the outside, Amelia's mind remained a tangled web of thoughts and emotions. She had told herself she would allow herself to trust him, to lean on him when she needed help, but every time she caught herself thinking about the future, a flicker of doubt would surface. Could she truly rely on someone like Sebastian? Someone who had built his empire on his terms, on his rules, someone whose world was so far removed from her own. It was easy to get lost in her thoughts when she was alone. When she was at the farm, surrounded by the quiet, familiar spaces of her childhood, her sense of peace was always at arm's length. Her mind would wander back to the dinner they had shared, back to the conversation they had about trust, about their shared vision for the future. But every time she allowed herself to lean into the possibility of something real between them, she pulled back, afraid of what that might mean. She didn't know how to navigate this new dynamic with Sebastian, didn't know how to reconcile her fierce independence with the growing feelings she had for him. One afternoon, she was at the farm, standing in the field near the barn, watching the wind blow through the tall grass. It was one of those moments of stillness, when everything seemed to stop, and she could almost hear her father's voice in the rustling of the leaves. This place was her heritage, her responsibility, and no matter how much help she accepted, it would always be a part of her. The sound of a car approaching broke the silence, and Amelia turned to see Sebastian's sleek black SUV coming up the dirt path. Her heart skipped a beat, a flutter of nerve she couldn't quite explain. She wasn't expecting him, but then again, with the way things had been going lately, it seemed only natural that he would drop by unannounced. As the car stopped, Sebastian stepped out, his usual confident demeanor replacing the casual tone of their last meeting. Today, there was something different about him, something less businesslike and more personal, like he was stepping into a different role than the one she had been used to seeing. Amelia, he greeted her warmly, his gaze softening when he saw her standing in the field, the light of the late afternoon sun casting a gentle glow around her. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, not at all," she replied, trying to mask the surprise in her voice as she straightened up from where she had been leaning against the fence. "What brings you out here?" Sebastian smiled, a touch of amusement in his eyes. "I thought it might be nice to see the place for myself, to get a sense of where everything began. I've spent so much time in meetings, looking at numbers and figures, that I thought it might be good to see the heart of it all." Amelia hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react. Part of her still wanted to keep him at a distance, to guard the farm from becoming just another one of his investments. But there was something in his tone, something genuine, that made her reconsider. "Follow me," she said, nodding towards the barn, her footsteps leading the way. Sebastian followed closely behind, his presence adding a quiet weight to the air between them. As they walked through the fields, Amelia spoke, telling him about the history of the farm, the years of hard work, the struggles, and the triumphs. She described the land with a sense of reverence, her words filled with pride for the life her family had built here. It wasn't just land to her, it was a piece of her soul, a connection to a past she couldn't let go of. Sebastian listened intently, asking questions when he could, but for the most part, he simply let her speak. The way he looked at her made her feel like she was the only person in the world, his attention unwavering, like every word she said mattered to him. She couldn't help but wonder if this was how it felt to be seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't have ulterior motives. By the time they reached the barn, Amelia felt like she had opened up more to him than she had to anyone in years. But there was still something she wasn't ready to share, the fear that still lingered in the pit of her stomach. "I know this place means everything to you," Sebastian said as they stood outside the barn, the setting sun casting long shadows over the land. "And I don't want to take that away from you. I just want to help you protect it. To give it the future you've always dreamed of." His words, so simple and yet so profound, hit Amelia harder than she expected. She looked at him, her chest tightening with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "I know you're offering help, Sebastian. But there's always a price. I can't shake the feeling that you're offering me something I can't afford." He took a step closer, his expression soft but serious. "There's no price, Amelia. Not in the way you're thinking. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I believe in you, in what you're trying to do. You don't have to do this alone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Amelia wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't just some grand gesture, some way for him to get what he wanted. But the reality of the situation, the reality of the choices she had to make, was more complicated than she was ready to admit. She looked away, her gaze shifting to the horizon, the land stretching out before her. She could almost hear her father's voice again, urging her to be strong, to fight for what was hers. But was this still hers? Or was it already slipping away, piece by piece? "Do you ever wonder if you're fighting for something that's already lost?" she asked quietly, the question escaping her before she could stop it. Sebastian stood beside her, silent for a moment as he processed her words. Then, gently, he replied, "I think we're all fighting for something. And sometimes, it feels like we're losing, but that's when we have to hold on tighter. You're not alone in this fight, Amelia. And if you choose to fight, I'll be right here with you." She felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She wasn't sure what to say, how to respond to the quiet sincerity in his voice. She had spent so long trying to carry everything on her own, so long thinking that asking for help meant weakness, that trusting someone else meant losing control. But here, with Sebastian, everything was different. For the first time, she wasn't standing alone. Amelia turned to face him, her heart racing as she looked into his eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can let go of everything I've worked for, even if it means saving the farm." Sebastian's gaze never wavered. "You don't have to let go, Amelia. You just have to let someone else help you carry it. You don't have to be alone in this fight. For a moment, they stood there, the world around them quiet, as if holding its breath. And in that moment, Amelia realized something she had been too afraid to admit for a long time: she didn't have to do this alone. It wasn't just about the farm, or the decisions she had to make, it was about allowing herself to trust someone else, to share the weight of it all. With a shaky breath, Amelia finally nodded, the answer clear in her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to take the next step. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The following weeks after the conversation at the barn felt like a shift, both for Amelia and for the farm. What had once felt like an insurmountable mountain, a weight she couldn't bear to carry alone, now seemed like something she could share. Sebastian had kept his word. He had shown up, not with promises of quick fixes, but with practical help, with knowledge and resources that Amelia never thought she would have access to. The financial plans had started to fall into place. Investors, willing to help the farm without taking ownership, had begun to show interest. Slowly, but surely, things were looking brighter. Yet, as much as Amelia wanted to let herself believe that everything would be fine, the uncertainty still gnawed at her. She still wasn't sure if this was truly the solution. But it felt like the first real chance to save what mattered most. Sebastian had become a constant presence in her life. He was always there, checking in, keeping track of every little detail, making sure the business side of the farm was moving in the right direction. He was just as committed to the future of the farm as she was, and he proved it time and time again, whether through phone calls or late-night meetings, his focus never wavering. It was a late Thursday evening when they had their first real moment of silence together in weeks. There had been so much going on, so many plans and details to work through, that Amelia barely had a moment to breathe. She found herself standing in the small garden outside her apartment, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The sun had set, but the sky was still a deep shade of purple, the first stars beginning to twinkle. She took a deep breath, letting the quiet surround her. Sebastian, who had been working late in his office, had finally stopped by to check in. Amelia had expected him to arrive with another list of things to do, but instead, he simply walked up to her, his usual business persona replaced by something more personal. Something more real. "Amelia," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You've been working so hard lately, and I just wanted to make sure you're taking care of yourself." She smiled faintly, appreciating the concern, though her own fatigue was starting to catch up with her. "I'm fine. Just a little, overwhelmed, I guess." Sebastian nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "I know. I've been pushing you. Pushing both of us, really. But we're getting there. And it's not just the farm, it's everything else, too. I don't want you to forget to breathe through it all." Her heart swelled with something she wasn't ready to admit, something she couldn't name, but something deep that made her feel less alone than she had in years. She had come to rely on him in ways she hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just helping her with the farm, he was helping her carry the weight of everything else that had always felt so heavy. "I know I haven't made it easy," she said, her voice quieter now, the vulnerability in it something she wasn't used to showing. "I've been so focused on keeping everything together that I forgot to let go sometimes." Sebastian stepped closer to her, his expression more serious now, and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Amelia, you don't have to carry it all by yourself anymore. I'm not going anywhere. I'm in this with you." The sincerity in his voice sent a jolt of warmth through her chest. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. There was none. He was here, fully present, without hesitation. She swallowed, trying to process the feelings rising inside her. For so long, she had carried everything alone, convinced that to ask for help was a weakness. But here, with Sebastian, it felt different. It felt like something deeper. And for the first time, she allowed herself to admit that she needed him, not just for the farm, but for herself. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice thick with emotion. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not as afraid. Sebastian's eyes softened, and without a word, he closed the space between them, pulling her into a hug. It was a quiet moment, one where the world outside didn't matter. For just a second, all the worries, the stresses, and the uncertainties faded. All that mattered was the connection between them, the quiet promise of understanding and partnership. "I'm right here, Amelia," he whispered into her ear. "And we're going to make it through this, together." The words felt like a lifeline, a tether that kept her grounded even as the world seemed to shift around them. When they pulled back, there was something unspoken in the air between them, something that neither of them had yet addressed, but that neither of them could deny. There was more between them than just business, more than just shared responsibility. There was something that neither of them had expected but both had begun to feel. Something real. Something that could not easily be ignored. The next few days passed in a haze of meetings, farm activities, and new developments. The financial side of things was beginning to stabilize, and investors had shown more interest. For the first time, Amelia could see the light at the end of the tunnel. But every time she saw Sebastian, her heart raced a little faster, her thoughts always drifting back to that night in the garden, to the way he had held her, to the way he had made her feel less alone. But no matter how much time they spent together, Amelia kept a small part of herself distant, a part of her that was afraid to cross that line. She had always been independent, always put her work first. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, to rely on someone else in the way Sebastian was offering. But each day, she found herself slowly inching closer to the truth. She was falling for him. And the more she tried to deny it, the more she realized she couldn't. It was a Friday evening when Sebastian arrived at the farm again, his car pulling up beside the barn just as the sun was beginning to set. Amelia was in the field, overseeing some repairs on the fencing, her focus on the task at hand. She didn't hear him approach until he was standing beside her, the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel breaking her concentration. "Amelia," he called, his voice soft but firm. She looked up, a smile crossing her face when she saw him. "Hey," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "What's up?" Sebastian walked over, standing beside her, looking out at the land. The evening sky was painted with soft oranges and pinks, the fields bathed in a golden glow. For a moment, they both just stood there, taking in the peace of the moment. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, more contemplative. Amelia turned to face him, her heart fluttering in her chest. "About what?" "About how far we've come. About everything we've been through in the last few months," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "And I think it's time we stop pretending like we're just business partners." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. This wasn't how she had imagined their conversation going. But before she could say anything, Sebastian took a step closer to her, his hand reaching for hers. "I care about you, Amelia," he said, his voice low and sincere. "More than just the farm, more than just what we've been working on together. I care about you." Amelia stood there, frozen for a moment, her breath caught in her chest. Her mind raced, but her heart knew. She had known this was coming, even if she hadn't wanted to admit it. "I care about you too," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Sebastian's face softened, and he reached out, cupping her face in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them moved, as if the world around them had disappeared. And then, slowly, carefully, he kissed her. It was soft, gentle, full of promise, and when they pulled apart, they didn't need to say anything. The kiss had said it all. For the first time in a long time, Amelia didn't feel like she was walking this path alone. She had Sebastian by her side, not just as a partner in business, but as someone who truly understood her, who cared for her in a way that no one ever had. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt, but for the first time, Amelia knew she wasn't alone. And with that knowledge, she felt ready to face whatever the future held. Together,